somehow underrated. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree. I drafted him, but there is batting average risk there. He's not a huge batting average guy, and his slumps can be brutal if you have him in your lineup when he goes like 0 for 20, and he's good for 1 or 2 of those per year. When he gets hot, though, on the other hand, look out. That's a guy you want. All right. A lot of folks seem to have wanted Shin-Soo Choo. I think it's an interesting debate, Choo versus Rios. I think I have Rios ranked higher, actually. I'm going to throw that out to the group here and see what they say. So after Pujols, it was Scherzer, Rios, Strasburg, Pedroia. At Zulu Delta Romeo says, Bruce's slumps are hard to deal with as a Reds fan. So, yeah, I can only imagine. I've lived with Brendan Belt as a Giants fan for the past couple of years, and it seems like maybe he finally turned the corner and developed into the contact hitter he was supposed to be. But man, watching him kind of grow up as a rookie and a second-year player was tough to watch at times. You see him take swings and, oh my god, just make you want to pull your hair out. So we got 1 vote for Rios over Choo from Justin Klein. It sounds like him and I are of very similar mindsets when it comes to fantasy baseball drafts and rankings in general. Check in on the stream chat. Anybody chiming in here? Steve's was thinking Kipnis in the 3rd, so happy to get Carlos Gomez there and Pedroia still be there in the 4th. Yep, that's a pretty good value for sure. It's nice knowing that you can pass on Kipnis and pass on Cano and still get kind of quality second baseman later in the draft. I tend to avoid second base like the plague in the early rounds just because there are a lot of guys in the mid rounds that I like a lot, and we've talked about that on the stream before. Matt Carpenter in the 4th or 5th I like a lot more than Robinson Cano or Jason Kipnis in the 1st or 2nd. And going down the ranks, your Ian Kinsler even below that, Altuve, Brett Lawrie, Brandon Phillips, Aaron Hill, Jed Jerko, way down in the rankings. It's kind of interesting how far some of these guys fall down. Like, Jerko just reminds me of Dan Uggla so much, like when Dan Uggla was good, that I don't understand why he's so far down the rankings relative to the other second basemen. So looking at the top of the Yahoo ranks here, it's loaded with pitchers. Everybody's avoiding pitchers like the plague. Cliff Lee, Jose Fernandez, then Justin Upton, and Madison Bumgarner, although Cliff Lee was just taken. That might have been an auto pick, but I doubt it. But yeah, this is where you can, especially if you're drafting with experienced people, get a lot of value at the starting pitcher position just because there are so many of these elite arms that are available. Meanwhile, the elite bats are just much harder to come by. Top of my ranks here, Justin Upton. Put him in the queue. Who else is in there? Posey's still in my rankings. I'll throw him in the queue. It might be worth selecting him here in the 5th, just again as practice to see what it's like if you do go catcher early. I might not do that, but I might go for it and see what happens. Who else is in there? Jose Reyes. I don't know if he's still available. Nope, he was just selected. After Lee, Jose Fernandez, then Reyes went. Steve, I didn't think that Zach auto-drafted Cliff Lee. It was just every time someone goes from the top of the rankings, it's always suspect in my mind. It could have been a lot of different options there. So let's see. Yeah, top of my rankings are a lot of pitchers. So, I mean, I could definitely think about going with a pitcher in this spot. We're to the point now where most of these bats in the rankings are gone. And names like Scherzer, Fernandez, Verlander, Bumgarner, they're starting to creep up my overall rankings. And definitely willing to take those guys starting in the 5th round. There's some banter going around here about Ian Desmond and how legit he is with his mustache. And Steve says the mustache increases his player radar value by at least 5 spots. Justin Klein says the mustache is a big plus for OPS. So, I mean, it must be a good pick if that's the case. Anyway, back to actual draft strategy. Who am I looking at here? Chris Sale's another pitcher I like. I'd probably take him over a lot of these guys. Maybe not necessarily Verlander, although Sale might be a little safer. I have a feeling, as the guy who also drafted Albert Pujols, I'm of the mind that Verlander is not done and that he's going to bounce back pretty well. With that said, if I was going to take a starting pitcher here, I might gamble on someone who's a little safer than Verlander. Who else could we be looking at here? Let's go by position. That might help me narrow it down here. First base, 2 catchers on top of the first base rankings, Posey and Mauer, and that's largely due to what position they play. The first base or the second base ranks, you're looking at Matt Carpenter at the top, and then Ben Zobrist and Jose Altuve. These are all the Yahoo ranks, of course. Third baseman, Ryan Zimmerman, Matt Carpenter, Manny Machado. This is a position I do need to keep an eye on because I don't have a third baseman yet, and the talent drop-off is pretty steep at the hot corner. Shortstops, I've got Hanley, so I'm not too concerned about getting any of these guys. Outfielders, oops, I just went to pitchers. Outfielders, excuse me, Starling Marte, Yoenis Cespedes, Alan Craig, Hunter Pence, Will Myers. That's the top of the list there. So let's see who was taken before I get into this pick. So after Jose Reyes was taken, then Justin Upton, then Matt Holliday, Madison Bumgarner, David Ortiz, Ian Kinsler, Chris Sale, Craig Kimbrell. So we could think about Posey here. He would be the highest rated player in my rankings. I think I'm going to pass on catcher, focus somewhere else. And that player is going to be Will Myers, I believe. Double check my rankings. I think he's the guy I have highest here. He is. So I'm banking on a lot of young guys to go with the old fart Albert Pujols, but yeah, it's not a pick I mind. Zimmerman, third base, is interesting, but again, I'm not super concerned about filling that position just yet. We'll see what happens here at the wheel. Zimmerman could get taken because Jason does have his third base spot open, like I do. Coming back to me here, it again behooves me to consider Posey. Starling Marte is a guy I like a lot. He's someone to consider, as is Zimmerman. We could go pitcher. I do like Verlander, like I said, a fair amount. Taking Matt Carpenter is not a bad idea either, just to get a second baseman slash third baseman. That gives me some flexibility going forward. I can either try to target value at second base later in the draft or at third base later in the draft. And that's pretty appealing. Is that better than taking Marte? I think so, if only because I have 3 outfielders already. Is it better than taking Posey? I'm not sure. Posey will offer the same, batting average value that Carpenter will, but he'll also add more power from a premium position at catcher. Kind of looking at what they each did last year, Carpenter had 11 home runs, Buster Posey had 15. Yeah, Alan Craig and Verlander were the 2 picks made there, so I'm not taking Verlander, unfortunately. Another guy that is up here on my rankings that I probably should be talking more about is, where is he? Eric Hosmer. And I could slot him into my infield position, which would be pretty solid, I think. But looking at the other first baseman available, I have a feeling that's somewhere I might try to get some value later in the draft. Not necessarily worry about that just now. And with that, worry about a position that's harder to fill, either second or third base. And I'm going to take Carpenter to do one of those 2 things. I think it'll slot him into second base, and if things go my way, that's where he'll play. But you never know. He might end up being my third baseman to go with someone like Aaron Hill at second. So let's see. Let's get back to the all-player list here and maybe start populating the queue with some other guys we might be interested in this with our next 2 picks. It's going to be a while before we come up again, so I like to do this every once in a while in an online draft, is just load up the queue with maybe not guys you're necessarily going to take that round or the next round, but with guys you want to remember to keep in mind. And with that said, I should definitely be starting to think about pitching. So I'm going to start throwing some starting pitchers in the queue here. Anibal Sanchez, Garrett Cole, Jordan Zimmerman, just always a quality arm. Homer Bailey had a really solid year last year. It's kind of crazy to see him ranked ahead of Matt Latos in most places, just because Latos was always, for the longest time, was just the Reds starting pitcher to own. And according to a lot of sites, that shifted this year. I don't know which one I have higher in my rankings per se. We can check that real quick. I have a feeling I probably have Bailey slightly higher. That might be an overreaction to last season, I will admit. No, I have Latos 1 spot higher, so I have them neck and neck, right around the same value as Matt Cain, which, I mean, that seems reasonable to me. Then again, they are my rankings. So let's see. After the Matt Carpenter pick, David Price was just selected. Richard Valero has chimed in to say he really likes Price this season, and getting him in the 6th round is pretty nice. You can't go wrong with that. Let's look at what other starting pitchers are available here. So there's Cain and Latos. Alex Cobb is an interesting name, as is Julio Teheran. I like some of these guys a little deeper in the rankings a lot too. Shelby Miller, Michael Wacha, Danny Salazar seems primed for a breakout. He might be a little overhyped though. I might be buying into that a bit too much. I mean, with that said, Tony Cingrani, a guy who just had a really great year last year on like a per inning basis, he's behind a lot of guys, and I don't really know why. Like, I definitely would take him ahead of guys like Doug Fister, Chris Medlin, and I mean, to me, he's not all that much different than maybe Matt Moore is. I know that Matt Moore had 17 wins last year, but wins are pretty volatile of a category. After the David Price pick went Aroldis Chapman, Eric Hosmer, and Kenley Jansen, so closers are starting to come off the board here. This is about the time in the draft when that typically starts to happen. I almost always wait a really long time before I take my first closer. With that said, if I can get an elite guy like a Jansen or Chapman at a point where I don't really like any of the other options available to me at other positions, I mean, I'll go for that sometimes. I do like having one really good closer on my teams. All right, back to this team. What are we looking at? I think a pitcher needs to start to enter the discussion here. And then I have catcher, third base, infield, another outfield spot, and 2 utilities to fill. The fact that there are 2 utilities definitely raises the value of outfielders and corner infielders, particularly first basemen. That's a lot of the time what your utility spots are going to go to are just like cheap power sources later in the draft. And those tend to come from first basemen. Guys like, I don't know, I mean, even Brandon Belt kind of falls into that category as a guy you can get late who might hit 25 home runs. But Matt Adams, Jose Abreu on the White Sox, Mike Napoli, Victor Martinez, Brandon Moss is a great utility target this year. So those are the kind of guys we can think about with those spots. With that said, if an outfielder slots better in there, that's something you have to consider. So Steve just chimed in saying didn't want to pick a closer there, but felt like Kenley was a good value as the third guy off the board. And I mean, that's just what we were talking about. That's a similar observation. But yeah, not a whole lot of big time value to be had at the closer position beyond the first 3. So if you miss out on those guys, it's probably worth just waiting. Greg Holland is maybe the exception to that. He'd probably be the number 4 guy. I mean, Koji Uehara also just had insane numbers last year. With that said, I don't know if I trust him to do it again. And Rosenthal has the makeup of a guy who could be elite, but we haven't seen him do it for more than a year.